but on lines 13 and 14, strike the language after two until the word trucks. Insert direct the Commissioner of Highways to report data on overweight trucks. Then on line 10, after one period, strike the remainder of line 10, line 11, and through 33.2-3 or 232.1, comma B. On line 12, insert section 1B, and then on line 21, after collection, insert that nothing herein shall require the Commissioner to prospectively gather additional data not already collected by the Commissioner or any transportation agency.
All right, thank you, Emma. So we have a substitute before us. I have a motion.
Move the substitute.
A motion to move the substitute. Have a second?
Thank you.
Second. Motion substitute properly before us. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, Delegate, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you, committee. So basically what this does now, convert it to a section 1 bill, so it's not in the Code of Virginia. It basically would instruct VDOT to work with data they already have to give us a better sense of the incidents of injuries and severity of accidents, crashes with overweight trucks, to look at wear and tear on the highways where they are used more predominantly, and also to give us a sense of how many vehicle miles we're taking off of the highways by allowing the overweight trucks. It's to try to get at some of the issues we talked about last year and we heard in our joint Senate and House Transportation Committee meeting. We just simply don't have the data about, and safety issues have been raised and wear and tear on our highways were raised. We already have, as you know, we allowed last year, 2 years ago, the loggers to go to 90,000 pounds. I think milk up to 100,000 pounds. Cattlemen are really very, and they've now sort of gotten on this because theirs is a very variable system and they really need to be able to go more than the 80,000 plus the overweight permit, which adds another 4,000. So 90,000 would get them where they need to be with carrying the numbers of cattle that they transport, usually across Virginia to get out west to be sold and so forth. So this is for an industry that's sort of looking at that and begin to get a better sense of is it safe, where is it safe, and the wear and tear issues related to it. Senator Carrico has the original bill in the Senate that's, as I understand, is moving through there. So this will come over at some point in time. We can deal with it then.
Thank you, Doug. Anyone in the audience to speak in favor of the bill? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Matt Westerrock, we're a paper products company. You may recall last year we were part of a broader coalition of a lot of larger businesses and trade groups that were advocating for the original pilot legislation. This is not that bill. This bill, as Delegate Garrett described, it simply allows VDOT to look back into the data they already have to attempt to address some gaps that they identified in their report last year. We thank the patron for bringing the bill and hope to support it.
Thank you, Mr. Wood.
Jason Carter, Virginia Cattlemen's Association. We also appreciate Delegate Barrett bringing forth the bill. We too participated in the stakeholder working group and exploring the feasibility of the pilot study, and we too agree we would like for the Department of Transportation to dig a little deeper into the data they may already have, given that there's overweight permits that have existed in the state for some time.
All right, thank you. Anyone to speak against the bill? VDOT, Joanne, would you please? Are you okay, Joanne? Now, I know that we had some misunderstanding as to what we originally thought the intent of the bill was, but I think we've clarified that now. We're all on the same page.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. I think it's very clear, and we agree. We understand that the report did identify there's some data
So
issues in this.
you think you'll be able to disseminate the necessary information to provide satisfy the government? Okay, right. Thank you. Okay. Any committee members have any comments or questions? I have a motion.
Move to report.
Second.
Got a motion to report, got a second.
So we have to vote on amendments?
With amendments. Yes, sir. Report with amendments. Okay, please vote. Delegate, your bill reports 5-0. Thank you, sir.
I thank the committee and the chairman.
Thank you.
No.
So we good.
The next bill before us today is the only bill we have remaining. It's Dr. John Bell's bill, 2667. Delegate, tell us about your bill, please.
Mr. Chairman, I have a substitute, amendment nature substitute, but I understand you want me to discuss the underlying bill first.
Yes, sir, that request has been made, so if we could discuss the bill and let people speak to the bill, then we'll talk about the substitute.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
This bill is, concerns a road called the Dulles Greenway. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's a privately owned 14-mile road, in Northern Virginia. It's close to the Dulles Airport. It begins west of Route 28 where the Dulles Toll Road ends, and it goes to Leesburg. 14 miles long. It was built in 1995, built under the 1988 bill that allowed public-private partnerships. It was really the first public-private partnership in Virginia. I think, frankly, there's many things about this road that we've learned on how to do public-private partnerships better, and there's many problems we have as a result of some of the things people didn't know or didn't anticipate. One of them is the fact that this is a very high-growth area that the road is in, and this is a primary east-west artery. Currently, regardless of how many exits you use, you pay one price. So often people use one or two exits on the eastbound, and at peak hours they're going to pay over $6 to use the road. The non-peak pricing is about $1 cheaper. There's also a pass-through that goes to Washington Metro Airport Authority of $1, going to go up to $1.50. So it's really hard for people to stomach paying that much for one exit, which could be less than a mile. And you would ask, why would people do that? Because their choices on the side roads are 45 minutes to an hour in traffic at peak times. So oftentimes people may be coming home from work to try to pick their children up at daycare. They're late for daycare, they pay $5 a minute. So they're making a hard choice. Do I pay for this toll? Do I pay for, the increased fees for daycare? In my time in the General Assembly, I've done a bill on the Greenway every single year to either try to study something, try to change something, to do something about this situation. This bill was based on some negotiations that I was part of with the Greenway owners and some other elected officials. Unfortunately, they have since withdrawn their support. My bill is for 10 years, and this bill would, in fact, put distance-based pricing in for all the hours except for non-peak, which is 6 to 9 a.m. in the morning eastbound and 4 to 7 p.m. on the westbound. So those are the peak times. We prefer to have a distance-based price solution 24 hours a day. Unfortunately, we couldn't get there. Currently, about 60% of the traffic is on the peak times, 40% on the non-peak times. The distance-based pricing would be 95 cents a mile. When I was negotiating with the Greenway partners on this, actually they wanted $1. I put it in for 95 cents because at 95 cents, out of all the scenarios where people get on and get off the road, they would actually have a cost savings for 51% of those scenarios. Depending on how far you go, you may not have a cost savings. But the deal also says that you would only pay the maximum you pay would be the non-peak toll. So if you did the whole 14 miles, you wouldn't pay $14. You would pay the $5.65, for instance. The other part is that it would be distance-based pricing for every weekend, 24 hours a day on weekends, and 24 hours a day on holidays. That accounts to about 91% of the operating hours for a year. This would be for 10 years. Currently, there is a deal on the Greenway that guarantees price increases. This was a bipartisan deal passed for 10 years. It was done by then Senator Mark Herring and Delegate Joe May. And it was done because when the Greenway was originally open for operation, it was approved to get 14% profit. So in effect, they could ask for each year the SEC CPI, the Consumer Price Index, inflation plus 14%. So increases were actually coming in quite high every year. To cap that, they negotiated a deal for 10 years. And that deal guaranteed the Greenway to either get 2.8% a year or CPI plus 1, whichever one was higher. CPI has averaged about 3% over the last 80 years, so it's going to be somewhere around 4%. This deal would continue that same price guarantee. So 2.8%, CPI plus 1. So they would get guaranteed increases each year in exchange for the distance-based pricing, and it would also cap those increases. Without those increases, we're taking a big risk. So folks would not get any distance-based pricing, and they would also get potentially 15, 20, 25% increases. And frankly, we would go in that same period of uncertainty we had before. So again, this is what the bill does. Since the offer by the Greenway owners has been withdrawn, and frankly, I would like for you to hear from them because I don't think that they would agree to my terms anyway. I've come up with a substitute to try to come up with another solution for this situation. Because the issue is really, we've got people who rely on this road, and they're paying these very high tolls. Some families are paying $400 or $500 a month per car, and some have to, both husband and wife work. So it's a real hardship, and we need to come up with some sort of a solution to help these folks.
Thank you, Doug. Let me now take questions from the audience on the bill, without the substitute, please. Okay? Who's here to speak in favor or speak to this issue based on the bill fact itself? Doug or Law?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this may be a little bit unique, but I am a user of the Greenway, represent many people in the district I serve who use the Greenway likewise. As with many things that pass through this legislature, the devil is in the details. The bipartisan effort, including Mark Herring and May, which passed through Commerce and Labor, I think was probably well-intentioned to create the outcome the delegate has indicated. However, in the details of that bill, there were loopholes created for the people that operate the Greenway, big enough to drive a truck through. They created a mechanism whereby the primary regulating mechanisms, we'll call it, there was a three-pronged test that the State Corporation Commission was to apply to proposed rate increases that related to profitability, reasonable profit, rate of return for the investor, value, and to the toll payer, and that it be such that it not materially discourage use. The 2008 bill effectively tied the State Corporation Commission's hands and prevented them from applying this three-part test to the toll increases proposed by the Greenway, and also created many other advantages for the Greenway, and I won't go into the long list. The effect is that tolls have been increasing at a far higher rate than they were prior to 2008. I went to the State Corporation Commission's table of rate increases, very reliable information. Prior to 2008, they were increasing at an average of 11 cents per year, and they are now increasing up between 2008 and present. They've increased at 26.5 cents per year. So the math doesn't lie. Extend one of the redeeming provisions that was put into this bill, and I'd love to research who had the foresight to put a 10-year sunset on these provisions that basically wrote over the provisions in the Virginia Highway Corporation Act, which previously had governed when this new bill was introduced. The redeeming term was that it would sunset in the year 2020. So this is the last session prior to 2020. And what the Bell bill proposes is to extend the terms that have been harming the toll road the Greenway users, the toll payers in the district I serve, for another 10 years. Now, for good reason, that Loudoun County Board of Supervisors worked this over in about a 3-hour session, focused specifically on this, and voted 8-1 that this was not good for Loudoun County. The consensus among anyone I've talked to who has any familiarity with the revised bill and what I call the 2008 sweetheart deal will be glad to see this expire once and for all, and to untie the hands of the State Corporation Commission so the tolls can be reviewed and set at a reasonable rate of return for the Greenway, allowing them to be profitable, but not turn the toll payers of Loudoun County and whoever else uses it into cash cows. There was a letter I found in the file, 2006-2007, written by Congressman Frank Wolf, that did a comparison between the rates that the Greenway was charging prior to 2008, and he considered them to be quite extreme at that point. This CPI plus 1, 2.8 guaranteed rate increase allows them to go even higher. So I will, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'll just conclude by saying, if you look at the bill before you, which proposes to extend these terms, and the substitute, I would say that in my opinion, this is just one person's opinion, that the substitute is a thinly veiled attempt to spin this in a very different direction. It proposes to have the VDOT take up its time studying an asset that is controlled by a private vendor, that is the Trip 2 partners, And meddling with that, I think, would be an impairment of a contract, depending on how we're done. And the Dulles Toll Road, which is controlled through a interstate compact by the Dulles Airport, Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority. Well, it may look good on paper, and it might look good on a brochure bill to try to spin this the primary bill that's being taken off the table. That's all it is, and I hope VDOT doesn't waste a whole lot of time on something that has been studied over and over and brought us to the same conclusion, that the Greenway is private, the Dulles Toll Road is the airport's road, and nothing they would do is change it. So passing the Belt bill would change it in a bad way. Passing this resolution just really kind of conceals what's going on overall. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Any questions, committee of Mr. Doug LaRock? Hearing none.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Miles Laurie representing the Dulles Greenway. I'm going to respond just to a couple of things that Delegate LaRock said, because frankly, there just is a difference of opinion and perhaps a difference of fact. And the contention from Delegate LaRock is that the CPI +1 deal that was done by Senator Herring, then Senator Herring, and Delegate May actually capped the rate of increase on the tolls. Now, previously, the tolling increases averaged, they were no lower than CPI +4.7. In many cases, it was CPI +5.8. The Greenway decided to leave money on the table for a very specific reason. They knew they could get more money if they went to the SCC for their tolling increases. What they found, and the reason they made the trade-off, left money on the table, was because the ability to have CPI +1 while a lower tolling rate, there was predictability in the tolling rate. And as the only private toll road in the Commonwealth, the only toll road that actually pays real estate taxes, that certainty was extraordinarily important. I mean, every other toll road in the Commonwealth has that certainty. The Greenway didn't. That's why they made the deal. So yes, there is a predictable increase in tolls. But gentlemen of the subcommittee, I can assure you that when we go back to the SCC for rate increases, for toll increases, excuse me, they are going to be higher than CPI +1. So I just want to set the record straight on that. As for Delegate Bell's underlying bill, we oppose the bill. What Delegate Bell is seeking to do is frankly too much in terms of what the Greenway is capable of doing. To give you an understanding of what it takes to bring distance-based pricing to the toll road, that is going to be an investment of $30 million. $30 million to bring distance-based pricing to a road that originally did not conceive of being a road that was going to be the subject of distance-based pricing. So that cost in and of itself is a tremendous burden for the Greenway to handle. The sunset that Delegate Bell has put on makes that investment in terms of the Greenway investors untenable. That's why we have to oppose his bill. Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience to speak to this bill? Any questions from any member in regard to the bill that's before us? We'll have a substitute.
Just a question, I guess, for VDOT, because the toll road that I go on is, well, it's a state road, but it's a subdivision, so the price increases there, is that goes through the SEC, or is that privately? I'm talking about the Bay Bridge Tunnel.
No,
I mean, is
Mr.
that?
Chair, Joanne Maxwell from VDOT. Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel is not governed by the Highway Corporation Act, which is the act under which the Greenway was constructed and was operated. So,
Didn't know how do they, another question?
Sure.
So the rate increase that they just had for the tolling of the Bay Bridge Tunnel, is that, I know the board of directors put it forward, but does that have to be approved by anyone, or is that just?
Mr. Chair, I do not believe that's the case. I believe that CBVT is governed by a commission that's established in the law, and I believe they have the authority.
It's full independence?
Yes, sir.
It is a political subdivision. It has authority.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Doug Bell.
Mr. Chairman, first I want to say a couple things in response to several things that Delegate LaRock said. When the Loudon board when they discussed this, they did not discuss my bill. They discussed they had a piece of paper and there were similarities to my bill, but it wasn't my bill. So the fact that they didn't like that doesn't mean they didn't like my bill. Because what they discussed was for a 37-year period, my bill's for 10 years, very different. And they claimed some outrageous guaranteed toll increases. That's if you extrapolate the number for 37 years. Mine was for 10 years. It's always been 10 years. The other thing, my bill is 95 cents per mile in the distance-based period. Theirs was for $1. So there were two different things. So I point that out. The other thing is, if we look at the last 10 years of rate increases the SEC has approved, they're much higher than what this bill would guarantee. The 2.8 or the CPI plus 1, assuming CPI stayed around the 3%. They've actually approved around 5.7. So we're really in a period, if we don't do this, not only will we not get any distance-based pricing at all, which is the number one thing people desire. They want to pay for what they use. They don't want to pay one price fits all, regardless of what they use. But what we will do is enter in a great period of uncertainty. Many people, when they get to winter, they guarantee the price of their heating oil or their natural gas. They lock it in, because they don't want to pay market prices every month. That's really what we're going to do. The other thing is, frankly, if the fight goes to the SEC each year, it's going to increase operating costs for the Greenway, which will ultimately go into higher tolls for the consumer. And government in Loudoun County previously spent well over 6 figures going to court to fight this. They're going to have to spend a great deal of taxpayer dollars to fight this every single year. Is this deal perfect? No, it's not. I wish it was 24/7 distance-based pricing, but it does cap these annual increases. It does bring distance-based pricing, which will help the corridor transportation-wise. It does do something. The last thing I'll say is the substitute. It's not a thinly veiled attempt to cover this up. I take offense to that remark. You know, frankly, I think that is inappropriate. I came up with something else to try to work the problem. I'd rather make progress. Unfortunately, if we're honest, this has become political. I wish it wasn't. I'd rather make progress and be about politics. But once the Greenway owners have withdrawn their support, I know that this deal can't go through. Because I don't believe in declaring eminent domain and doing things that poison the well for businesses in Virginia. And that's really what we'd be talking if we forced a business to do it. But I do think having a solution that would address the total problem. Secretary Valentine and Mr. Donahue were very gracious to work with me on what can we do given where we're at. And that's when we came up with this new solution, which would be a study. And that study would then take both roads, not just one, because frankly, people would still be paying a one price fits all for the Dulles Toll Road. And that has experienced tremendous increases. In the last 10 years, it's gone from $1 to $3.25. That's a huge amount of increase. So making sure that they were both distance-based pricing and coming up with a total solution, I think would be a better way to go. The last thing I want to ask, Mr. Chairman, I would like to hear from VDOT about that study, if they could say something.
Delegate, if I could, Miles has spoken about the costs associated with distance-based tolling. Is that affordable? I mean, Miles says it's not practical nor affordable.
What he's talking about, I believe, he can clarify, is to the current tolling equipment that's on the Greenway,
Right.
is only equipped to charge one price.
Okay.
So to distance-based pricing, you need tolling equipment that can register when a vehicle enters
Right.
and register when they leave. And there's 71 different enter-exit scenarios, so it's fairly sophisticated. That equipment costs about $30 million.
Okay.
This bill and what we had previously worked on, the Greenway would absorb that, not at taxpayer or at the commuter cost. So to his point, my bill's for 10 years. Their position is that they cannot recoup that $30 million in 10 years, and I understand that. But that's where we're at with this.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does. All right. Well, yeah, I think we need to get the substitute before it's now. Okay.
So moved.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pass that down. I'm sorry. Jason.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It has a special post code.
Oh.
Just get it posted online.
Oh, okay, I got it.
We have extra one. No, Bob, you got two there. Pass me
Did I
one.
not give you one?
No, I passed it on. Thank you.
does basically is, again, try to explain the geography for those who aren't familiar. The Greenway is the 14-mile road west of Route 28. Once you hit Route 28, then it turns into the Dulles Toll Road. So Dulles Greenway, Dulles Toll Road. The Dulles Toll Road goes all the way down to 495. So what this would do would be to study combining both assets and doing distance-based pricing for both assets. And in alignment with, again, working with Secretary Valentine and Mr. Donahue, the whole Transform 66 was to try to put more people through the corridor. This would be in alignment with those goals of putting more people through the corridor and studying that. Another part of this
This is
would,
a private road, isn't it?
the Dulles Toll Road is actually operated by MWAS.
Right.
So it's operated by MWI as part of the deal with the Metro versus the Greenway is totally private. So
So how do we go about studying a private road and imposing the owners of that road to place the toll that we, the study, suggest or report? How do we go about doing that?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Nick Donahue, Deputy Secretary of Transportation. Delegate Bell is correct. The Secretary and I did work on the substitute with him. And what I want to say at the outset is this substitute does not predetermine an outcome. I don't think we have any intention of trying to violate business terms or agreements that have been made where people have invested private funds into a specific roadway. However, we do think there are opportunities where by combining these two roadways, we could purchase the Greenway from the current owners, take it out of operation of the Highway Corporation Act, which is, if you all heard from the discourse today, is, I think, the root of the concerns. You heard multiple people say things and nobody said anything good about how this gets regulated by the SEC. And so the goal would be to purchase the Greenway, take it out of that operation, work with MWA, who's currently operating the Dulles Toll Road through a permanent operating agreement with the department. So the Dulles Toll Road is a department-owned facility that we have currently given a lease to the toll road, to MWA, to operate that toll road. What we would try and examine, sir, and I can't promise we'll be successful. What I can promise is we do think there are real opportunities. We've done some initial due diligence, and we think that if we can implement distance-based pricing and try and drive additional traffic to this roadway, there are opportunities to lower not only the average toll paid, but the end-to-end toll paid along this facility while respecting the outstanding debt for Dulles Rail and being able to potentially purchase the Greenway from those private operators. We are not talking about doing anything nefarious with regard to disrupting any private business entity. I think those of you who've seen me in this room, I often talk about private contracts we have with people, so I think you know that our intent would be to respect those. But if you look at the Dulles Toll Road, which is Route 267, and you compare that to other roads that have east-west travel, so Route 7, Route 267, 66, and 50, the toll road used to carry almost 35% of traffic. It's now down to somewhere between 25 and 30%. If we can recapture that traffic back on this roadway, look for opportunities for increased efficiency, we think we can realize a real good for the driving public in Northern Virginia.
What is the length of the Greenway?
Greenway's
14
miles.
14 miles. What is the right of way for the Greenway? Do you know, Nick?
I do not
Is
know,
it
sir.
bearing right of way? I know that, I was told that all the property was acquired without any eminent domain, which is amazing that we got a 14-mile road up there that we built without eminent domain, but just curious, you don't know the right of way?
I do not know the width of the right-of-way. I do know that there is probably unutilized right-of-way along that corridor, because I do know the Dulles Rail project is able to run through a portion of the median. I don't know the width, though.
I see, okay, there's a 14-mile roadway.
Yes, sir, from Leesburg.
2-lane roadway, 4-lane roadway?
6-lane.
6-lane roadway.
In most places. I think there
Some
might be,
places 4 lanes, so 2
Yeah.
in each direction.
Okay,
the further east you get, the wider it gets.
okay. But you agree and concur that it's a private roadway and we have limited say over it?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, in case I've given anyone the wrong impression.
No, you're not.
It is a
But I-
fully privately owned road. It is the only privately owned toll road in the Commonwealth, and it is the only road operated under the Highway Corporation Act of 1988. I'd be happy to go into details about why I think there could be advantages of getting it out of there, but I'm not sure that.
No, I don't think we need to close that, but, and that's what bothers me about this, the fact that, if we are possibly with some intent to acquire in the future, and we're gonna study it and say that it does have potential, then that drives up the value of the owners, so.
Mr. Chairman, I would add, there's been several studies about acquiring just the Greenway. We've never studied the Greenway and the Dulles Toll Road. That option's never looked at, but Delegate May actually did a study on acquiring the Greenway. It came back that it wasn't feasible to do that. The way the debt is structured, about half of the debt in the bonds, and this is complicated, are non-callable bonds. So if you buy them back early, you would still have to pay all the interest that would accrue between now and 2056.
Life of the bond, sure.
Right, and that's when 2056, the 14-mile Greenway goes to Commonwealth ownership then. So we're talking about what happens between now and 2056.
I see.
So it's complicated, as far as the way it's structured right now to try to come up with a way out of it. I looked at studying a partial buyback, because if there was a partial buyback, then right now they pay over $1 million a year to the Greenway for state police protection, because it's a private road, and the state police won't patrol it without being paid. As Miles mentioned, they pay $4.5 million a year tax to Loudoun County. Most public-private partnerships don't pay tax. This is really just a private road allowed to operate in this area. Most public-private partnerships, there would be skin on both sides. And I think those are some of the flaws in this that make it more expensive. They do their own road maintenance, snow removal. So the economies of scale of, for instance, putting it in the VDOT system are there, because there's costs on just doing 14 miles versus the whole system that are driving this toll. I mean, frankly, there's been many different approaches to this. I'm open to anything that makes us better, because most of the problems we're struggling with today are really caused by what was done back when the road was built. And I think many people didn't anticipate the amount of growth in that area and how much this roadway would be needed. That's why we're here.
Good, thank you. Any questions from the delegate?
So, appreciate that. So, it sounds like there's been a couple of studies before. First time we've looked at maybe what benefits by looking at the whole corridor. And you're referencing some studies that you thought about. So this in front of us just asks for them to evaluate. So, I mean, what level of detail are you looking for? Because if they're not allowed to go deep enough, we may not get the answer. And obviously, if we turn into the study, that's another problem.
Mr. Chairman, what I would say is, I mean, first off, I think we need to know, as Mr. Donahue said, they've done some initial calculations. I think we need to go deep enough to know, is this even feasible? Will this dog hunt? And I think from there, we've never looked at it combining both roads. But again, a distance-based pricing for the whole corridor would be a huge improvement. Because even if my original bill were to have happened, that would have only been for the 14 miles. It would not have been for the Dulles Toll Road. So they still would have had a problem. So this, I think, is a better total solution. We've also never studied the throughput of moving people. And as Mr. Donahue mentioned, that's dropped. And that's something we should look at. Because one of the key things to, frankly, making business like Amazon work and get them there is knowing we can move people from where they're going to live to where they're going to work. Because everybody can't live in Arlington where that's going to be. Most of those people are going to have to live other places and commute back and forth. I think my wife, she's a realtor, she looked, and as soon as that announcement came out, there were only 3 or 4 houses even available in that area where that's going to be. So 25,000 people are not going to live there. They're going to have to commute.
Mr. Secretary, what's the length of the Dulles Toll Road?
I believe it's 14 miles as well.
So it's
28 miles.
28 miles total.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Significant.
And that's an 8 lane, so.
That is an 8-lane road. So
And that includes the 2 in the middle, the 4
Does
lanes.
not include the access road. Just the toll road itself is 4 lanes in each direction, 3 lanes in total.
Pardon me, would you like to speak?
Yes, my name is Gwen Kenny, Mr. Chairman,
Come
members of the
forward.
committee. I actually represent Loudoun County.
Yes, ma'am.
So, I just wanted to say that, the board, as Mr. Rock said, we did, have an opposition to the original bill. Basically, the position of the board supervisors is that we would like the sunset to occur and be able to take the case to the FCC. We think that there is, based on the tests, that we have reasonable knowledge that it doesn't meet the tests. So, and we have no position on the substitute. So, that's it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Patrick Cushing, representing the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. No position on the underlying introduced bill. I'll just make a few brief comments on the substitute. We've talked to the Deputy Secretary about it. We don't have any issues with it. We've looked over the elements. Certainly, if the state wants to look at taking over ownership and responsibility of the Dulles Toll Road, we're happy to have that happen. As you know, Dulles Toll Road was handed over to the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority to use as a funding, to operate and use as a funding mechanism for construction of the Silver Line, which we are also doing in parallel to the Dulles Toll Road. So the only real criteria in that study, which we talked to the Deputy Secretary about, is making sure that our bondholders are made whole in any transfer if that were to occur, because that's used to support construction of the Silver Line. So with that, we happy to work with the Deputy Secretary.
Any questions? Thank you, Matt.